Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Awesome Albums with Awesome Andrew. A question for the metal fans out there that are watching this. What are some of your favorite artists growing up? A little more recently, I guess you'd say Slipknot. If you go back to the 90s, you'd probably say Pantera. Go back to the 80s, you'd probably say one of the big four, Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, or Slayer. Go back to the 1970s when heavy metal was still in its infancy, you'd probably consider one of the big three of heavy metal, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, and Black Sabbath. Some throw Blue Oyster Cult into that mix too. So today, we are going to take a look at what is often considered the first or one of the first heavy metal albums, Paranoid by Black Sabbath. Before going any further, let's introduce the band. Ozzy Osbourne on vocals, Tony Iommi on lead guitar, Terry Geezer Butler on bass, and Bill Ward on drums. Our story begins in February of 1970. Black Sabbath released their debut album in the UK on February 13th and June 1st in the US. Their first album has raised some eyebrows as the public wasn't sure what to think of this new sound. We have this album and we have the first two Zeppelin albums, which were both some of the heaviest stuff the public had ever heard. Black Sabbath, understandably because of their name, were commonly mistaken as a black magic group. Bill Ward said in a Melody Maker interview, "Since we became known, it has been a complete mix-up. We've continually been put in the same bracket as Black Widow. They practice black magic on stage with ritual killings and things, but we are completely anti-black magic. Some stage numbers we do are against black magic. One song in particular called Black Sabbath is against black magic and all its implications," end quote. Ozzy said something similar. "Black magic is a thing we're trying to stamp out. There's always been an interest in these primeval black arts, but it was such magazines like Man, Myth, and Magic, helped along by the press, that blew it all out of proportion. With our name Black Sabbath, people therefore assumed that this was our scene. For some unknown reasons, people seem to expect something out of the ordinary when we appear," end quote. After their first album came out, they bought all the music papers they could find, only to find that they were savagely attacked by the critics. Tony Iommi said, "It completely threw us. What had gone wrong? Were we as bad as they made us out to be? It really made us stop and think," end quote. Geezer Butler said, "Then just when our spirits seemed to be at their lowest, the album suddenly made its surprise appearance in the charts," end quote. Despite the critics hating it, it was on the best-selling album chart for 4 months, so clearly people liked it. Ozzy said, "In about the span of 6 months before our album came out, we had built our loyal pocket of fans all over the country. When it was eventually released, they all went out and bought it, and that was sufficient enough to put it in the charts and create a demand. Also, it would be the same old story of whoever the critics put down, the public usually digs," end quote. But enough about their debut album, we're here to talk about their second album. So in an effort to capitalize on their success of their first album, they went back into the studio with Roger Bain in June of 1970 to start working on their next album. The album was recorded at Regent Sound Studios and Island Studios in London. Most of the groundwork was done at Regent Sound on June 16th and 17th. They got the songs down so things moved pretty quickly at 16-track Island Studios, originally Basing Street Studios and now SARM Studios. The 4-track recordings from Regent were transferred to the 16 tracks at Island Studios on June 19th. The album was then mixed. Mixing took place on the upper floor while the recording facilities are in the basement, formerly the crypt of the church. The mixing also took place at Island. I know I kind of flew past this section, but that's about how quick they flew through the recording of the album. Well, I mean, not really, but they recorded the whole album between June 16th and June 21st, just 5 days. Tony Iommi said, "It was all just an instant thing, spontaneous if you like. There was little written down, it was all in our heads and came out as one," end quote. He also said, "This LP is much better than the last one. We've put a lot of hours into it. The trouble with the first LP was that we only had 2 days to record it. Most of the songs were recorded in one take. The new LP is much heavier. I like it better that way," end quote. The album was released on September 18th, 1970, though tours promoting the album started a week earlier on September 11th. That means that a couple months ago, this album turned 50 years old. Wow! Now let's move on to the album cover. The album cover is based on the original name for the album, which was going to be War Pigs, named after the album's opening track. But the US label thought that War Pigs was a little too strong given the fact that we were in the middle of the Vietnam War during that time. It's also possible that the name was changed to Paranoid because the record company was convinced that the song of the same name had potential to be a single. The back cover shows a similar image, the same guy with a sword and shield. The original UK releases have a gatefold sleeve featuring a black and white photo of the band posed outside on a grassy hill at Black Park. This photo was shot by Keith McMillan, who took a photo of the band's first album cover. With all this out of the way, let's jump into the music. All the songs are credited by all 4 band members. Most of the songs evolved during onstage improv jams. One of the nights at one of the clubs, Geezer Butler said, "During the song Warning, we used to jam that out, and that one particular night when we were jamming it out, Tony just went, da-dum," end quote. The opening lyrics of the song,
generals gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses.
Geezer Butler was asked in a 2013 interview with Spin magazine about why he used masses twice rather than coming up with a different word. He said, "I just couldn't think of anything else to rhyme with it, and a lot of the old Victorian poets used to do stuff like that, rhyming the same word together. It didn't really bother me. It wasn't a lesson in poetry or anything," end quote. The song was originally called Walpurgis, but was changed to War Pigs. Geezer said, "I wanted to write a song called Walpurgis, the satanic version of Christmas. Write about that Satan isn't a spiritual thing, it's warmongers. That's who the real Satanists are. All these people who are running the banks and the world and trying to get the working class to fight the wars for them. We sent it off to the record company and they said, no, we're not going to call it that, too satanic. So I changed it to War Pigs," end quote. He also said in another interview, "But we didn't change the lyrics because they were already finished," end quote. Ozzy said in his autobiography, I Am Ozzy, it was originally going to be called Walpurgis, which was a term for a black magic wedding or something. Then we changed it to War Pigs, and Geezer came up with these heavy-duty lyrics about death and destruction. No wonder we never get any chicks at our gigs. Geezer just wasn't interested in your average I Love You pop song. Geezer also liked to put a lot of topical stuff like Vietnam references in our songs. He had his ear to the ground, Geezer did," end quote. In the History of Rock 1970 magazine, Ozzy had a song-by-song breakdown of the songs on Paranoid. For War Pigs, he said, "It's about VIP people who are sitting there saying, go out and fight, and all the everyday people are forced to, but the VIPs never do. We're not a political group, it's just that most of our songs have messages," end quote. While the band was very pro-peace, the sunny pop songs didn't appeal to them. They came from a bleak industrial town and they realized hippies weren't preventing the senseless Vietnam from raging, and so they have a gloomy, heavy music to reflect that. The outro of the song was originally listed as War Pigs' Luke's Wall, as Luke's Wall was another name for the end of the song. I guess you know a song is good when a different part of the song has its own name. In Mick Wall's book, Black Sabbath, Symptom of the Universe, Butler was dead set against using this song because of how closely it resembled Communication Breakdown by Led Zeppelin. Listen to the two side by side. I thought it was so much like that we couldn't possibly get away with it. They were our favorite band by that time, end quote. He said in an interview with Mojo in 2015, "Paranoia was about depression because I didn't really know the difference between depression and paranoia. It's a drug thing. When you're smoking a joint, you get totally paranoid about people. You can't relate to people. There's the crossover between the paranoia you get when you're smoking and the depression afterwards," end quote. Butler said in an interview with Dave Everly on Classic Rock, "I used to be a cutter. I'd cut my arms, stick pins through my fingers, that kind of thing. I used to get really depressed, and it was the only thing that could bring me out of it. If Sabbath hadn't made it, I'd have been long dead. I'd have killed myself," end quote. This song, as you can tell, is obviously the title track, formerly known as The Paranoid, but what if I told you that this song was an afterthought? Bill Ward said, "We didn't have enough songs for the album, and Tony just played the guitar lick, and that was it. It took 20-25 minutes from top to bottom," end quote. Geezer Butler said in an interview with Guitar World in 2004, "A lot of the Paranoid album was written around the same time of our first album, Black Sabbath. We recorded the whole thing in about 2 or 3 days live in the studio. The song Paranoid was written as an afterthought. We basically needed a 3-minute filler for the album, and Tony came up with the riff. I quickly did the lyrics, and Ozzy was reading them as he was singing," end quote. The song became a single released on July 17th, backed with The Wizard from their first album. The single reached number 4 on the UK singles chart and number 61 in America. Since then, it is ranked number 34 on VH1's 40 Greatest Metal Songs. It was placed at number 11 on Q Magazine's 200 Greatest Guitar Tracks, and was placed at 250 on Rolling Stone's list of 500 greatest songs of all time. After the release of the single, the band became victims of fan worship. One show in Newcastle, their show was planned to be about 2,100 people, about 1,800 tickets, and about 300 from the street to prevent a riot. The show ended with over 2,500 people. Most of them were screaming fans trying to climb on stage to touch them. Ozzy asked the fans in a very foul language to leave the stage. They start off with Paranoid, and a nasty fight breaks out on stage. Bouncers quickly move in and eject those fighters. After an hour and 10 minutes, they go back for one more encore and then disappear into the changing room. During all the chaos, a fan puts a foot through one of the PA speakers, causing about 70 pounds of damage. Most of Bill Ward's drumsticks and a cymbal were stolen. The bass drum mic was stepped on and crushed. He said, "We only want to play music, not go through that every time we go on stage," end quote. Ozzy said, "It's like since the single, we are getting a load of teeny boppers. I like people to come and listen and act properly. I felt really sorry for the people in the back. I'm certain they wanted to listen. If it means us having to give up putting out singles, then we will. We want people to listen to us, not try to touch us. I was really terrified, shocked out of my mind, end quote. One last thing before moving on, a fun fact. Paranoid in Finland is like Freebird in America. In America, no matter what show you're at, no matter the artist, someone every time will shout, "Play Freebird!" In Finland, regardless of who it is or the style of music, someone will always shout, "Play Paranoid!" After the first two songs, this song takes the album in a different direction. It's a very soft, quiet song. It was a great way to show that while the band can come up with awesome guitar riffs, it shows they have a softer side as well. Iommi admitted that the band had doubts about this one when he was talking with Classic Albums. He said, "It was almost one of those, should we do this?" with Butler adding, "We just came up with that in the studio and it was really laid back, and so we didn't want to come out with the usual love crap, so it was just floating through the universe with your loved one instead of let's go down to the pub and have some chips or whatever. Just taking a spaceship out in the stars and having the ultimate romantic weekend," end quote. Ozzy said, "We wrote this in the studio as well. We decided to vary the album more by having a soft number. It's a smoky jazz club number about someone going through space seeing stars and things," end quote. It seems to be a rule of thumb that every metal album seems to have at least one ballad or power ballad to offset the surrounding songs, which is often nicknamed the Stairway to Heaven rule, which is funny because Stairway wouldn't be released for another year. The music was influenced by jazz musician Django Reinhardt, which is evident in Iommi's playing. The piano parts are played by engineer Tom Allom. Iommi overdubbed the flute to the reversed multitrack master, which was then re-forwarded and treated with stereo delay. Ozzy sings through a Leslie speaker. He said, "Then Roger Bain used an oscillator on it," whatever that is. It looked like a fridge with a knob on. End quote from a 2010 Mojo interview. The song was never played live, but they did experiment with it with bits of Into the Void and Children of the Grave, both from their third album. There are debates on how they got the distorted vocals at the beginning. It was rumored that Ozzy sang through an oscillating fan to get that sound, but it's more likely his voice was run through a process called a ring modulator, which creates a wobbly electronic effect by making the input signal with an oscillator. The song is a sci-fi drama that was originally called Iron Bloke. Upon hearing Iommi play the main guitar riff for the first time, Ozzy said it sounded like a big iron bloke walking around. The title was changed to Iron Man as Geezer composed the lyrics. Ozzy said in his memoir, "Iommi turned out to be one of the greatest heavy rock riff makers of all time. Whenever he went to the studio, we challenged him to beat his last riff, and he'd come up with something like Iron Man and blow everyone away," end quote. This was another single released from the album, peaking at number 52, but not until 1972. Ozzy said, "This is about a guy who invented a time machine, and he goes through time and finds the world is going to end. Coming back, he turns to iron and people won't listen to him. They think he's not real. He goes a bit barmy and decides to get his revenge by killing everyone. He tries to do good, but in the end turns into bad," end quote. This is one of Sabbath's biggest songs, and it was at number 317 on Rolling Stone's list of 500 greatest songs of all time in 2004, and VH1 ranked it as the greatest heavy metal song of all time. Lastly, despite the similar names, it has nothing to do with the Marvel character, although it was used in the end credits of the 2008 film, and also Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr., wears a Black Sabbath t-shirt in the 2012 Avengers movie. This song uses apocalyptic imagery dealing with nuclear warfare. In the film The Last Supper, Iommi remembers that all the time with the bands, it was all the flowers in your hair and we wanted to sing and play about the other side of life, end quote. Ozzy said, "In years to come, the way things are going, there's going to be a nuclear war," which is what this track's about. There's a lot of evil in the world today, end quote. And that is so true, especially today. Iommi said that they would often play any given song in a variety of ways, but once it was recorded in the studio, any quirks and oddities in the recording dictated how they would play from then on. In his book, Iron Man, My Journey Through Heaven and Hell with Black Sabbath, Iommi writes, "When we recorded Electric Funeral, Bill would play it differently every bloody time. He didn't know how many times to come in, and at certain parts he plays 3 instead of 4. We kept 3, and to this day we still play it that way," end quote. Lastly, this was the B-side to the Iron Man single. This song is the first in a trilogy of drug songs, followed by Sweet Leaf on Master of Reality and Snowblind on Volume 4. The song was inspired by seeing all the syringes left on the ground by audience members at their shows. The song dealt with the problem of soldiers returning from Vietnam strung out on heroin, which the band witnessed firsthand when they played 2 American Army bases out, as Butler observed to Matthew Longfellow in 2010. He said, "There was nothing on the news about this. There was no program telling you that the US troops in Vietnam, to get through that horrible war, were like fixing it up and all this kind of thing. It just stuck in my head, and when we got to Hand of Doom, that's what I wrote it about," end quote. Ozzy said in his track-by-track breakdown of the album, "It's about people on drugs and what happens to them. Their skin turns green and things. There's a lot of gory words, but we've seen a lot of people like that, and it's getting all out of proportion. You can frighten people with words, it's better than letting them find out by trying drugs. I'm not trying to say we're angels. I've indulged to a certain extent, but I never try any of the hard drugs or trips or anything," end quote. When was this quote said or written? The song is also one of the songs that helped consolidate Black Sabbath as the darkest or one of the darkest groups of the 70s. This is Bill Ward's answer to Moby Dick by Led Zeppelin or Toad by Cream. The drum solo resulted from the band having to play 8 3/4-hour spots at night in Europe early in their career. Butler said Bill used to fill out a whole 45 minutes doing a drum solo just to get rid of that 45 minutes. "I have no idea where the title came from though," end quote from a Classic Albums interview. While he may have forgotten now where the title came from, in 1971 he said on record stating that the joke came about Ward's hair having not been combed. But one more fun fact, Van Halen almost named themselves Rat Salad and covered a lot of Black Sabbath songs when they were first starting out. Speaking of songs with unclear inspiration, here is this song, the final song on the album. The song has a different spelling on the UK version, F-A-E instead of F-A-I. Ozzy said, "Again, it's a warning about the use of drugs," end quote. In the 2010 episode of Classic Albums about Paranoid, Butler said that Ozzy composed lyrics after a group of skinheads in London called him a fairy because of his long hair. However, Butler also stated that Ozzy's lyrics often went in random tangents and the second half of the song was about LSD. Ozzy in the same documentary said he wrote the lyrics about LSD. Although in his autobiography, I Am Ozzy, he stated he did not recall what the song was written about. By the way, the skinheads I mentioned earlier aren't the same kind of skinheads that people think of in America. These skinheads aren't the racist kind, just the punk and anarchist kind. They usually wore boots, which is where the name came from. Now for the rest of the lyrics, Iommi said, "We smoked a lot of dope, so that might be why some lyrics are a bit unusual. They got attacked by these punk skinheads after a show, injuring Iommi and forcing them to cancel their next performance. The song, like Rat Salad, was often used to fill their stage set with 30-minute or longer versions. On the original 1970 US copies of Paranoid, the song's intro was listed as Jack the Stripper and appeared as Jack the Stripper / Fairs Wear Boots. Lastly, this song was released as the B-side to After Forever, a song from Master of Reality. And that concludes the album. There are so many great songs on it, and this album helped shape the sound of rock music and is credited to creating a whole new genre of music. That's impressive. So many metal musicians say that this album is what inspired them. Marty Friedman of Megadeth said, "When I was in my formative years as a guitarist, musician, and all-around rock dude, Black Sabbath was the gauge by which me and my friends measured the heaviness of any music that came out. Of course, there could be none heavier than Black Sabbath," end quote. The album broke Sabbath into America, and it reached number 12 on the US chart. It opened at 27 in the UK and went straight up to number 1 3 weeks in, and it was on that chart for 22 weeks before dropping back down to 63. This was their only album in the UK to reach number 1 on the charts until 13 was released in 2013. Kerrang! Magazine listed it at number 39 on the 100 Greatest Heavy Metal Albums of All Time list in 1989. In 2003, Rolling Stone magazine ranked it at number 130 on their list of the 500 Greatest Albums of All Time, and still at 131 on the revised version in 2012, but Rolling Stone considered it the greatest metal album ever. This has been Awesome Andrew telling you that Black Sabbath's Paranoid is an awesome album. I hope to see you in another episode.